Hey everybody, before we get started with this very different episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, I wanted to shout out my wonderful patrons. Starting with Games with Coffee, Patrice Millette, The Let's Play Princess, BT Goebbels, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, Seth Sturgill of the All End Podcast, Dan of Retro Logic, Ryan Payne of the Gamers Week Podcast, and Pete Harney. If you want to join these lovely people, go on by to patreon.com/A Gamer Looks at 40. And if a financial commitment is not in your plans, no worries. We are growing a small but budding Discord community. I would love for you to join and check out all sorts of nifty little extras I put out on that platform. Go to my Twitter bio. There's a link tree and an invite link sitting right there for you. And if not, DM me. I'd be happy to hear from you either way. Thanks again for checking out the show, and hope you enjoy.
Said that I might like Ocarina more than Majora's Mask, but I hate to tell you this. Majora's Mask is actually my favorite Zelda game.
Interesting. Is it because of those? And I don't like saying dark because I think that's a very broad expression. No offense if that's, but for me personally, that's just an expression that is a little broad. Is it because it has those sad, anxious? I find that game very anxious.
Oh, absolutely.
It's fraught with anxiety.
And this impending doom, which, okay, so if we talk about, my childhood, Ocarina of Time is when, things were hard but kind of simple. But Majora's Mask came out and my life was really complicated at that time. I was, a young teenager and a whole lot of changes in the family, a lot of stuff going on. And Majora's Mask, the anxiety I felt in the real world, I was feeling it in the game, but it wasn't about me. So it was fun,
Sure.
Take a little break, okay?
Sure. And it sounds like you might have been able to identify with it as well.
Absolutely.
Again, not trying to put words in your mouth, of course, but
well,
I was reading into
go right ahead because you completely guessed correctly.
Stop me if I'm wrong, but yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
The 5 stages of grief, and I believe that game is an allegory for the 5 stages of grief. So, and I will die on that hill.
I've heard that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why. To be fair, now just a quick aside on this, I am not an expert on Majora. I've played it a bit. I've been around it. I know enough about it. If you listened to last week's episode, you met Helena. She goes by Hell Hath Fury on TikTok. She's a very talented content creator. And her story, while unique to her, wasn't terribly unique to my guests. Unlike any Zelda game I've covered so far in this series, Majora's Mask brought up the most emotions. These personal stories that tie this game to experiences like I don't think any other Zelda game has or since. And while I can't speak for the rest of the series, I'm not there yet, I felt it be important to highlight 2 independent stories that I felt really encapsulate the emotional pull of Majora's Mask. And next week, we're going to talk about bells and whistles and first impressions and characters and all the other stuff that's related to this game. But for one episode only, I want to zero in on 2 experiences my guests were brave enough to share with me. First up is Seth Sturgill. He's a longtime friend of the show now. You've heard him on nearly every Zelda episode. Check his work out at the All End Podcast. He's another exceptional content creator, as he shares why his life was irrevocably changed by Majora's Mask. So when you make a remark like Majora's Mask is not only your favorite Zelda game, but might be your favorite game, full stop.
Yeah.
That's when I put the brakes on life and say, all right, we got to talk. We got to talk,
Yeah.
man. So I'd love to hear your history of how were you introduced to it? I'm assuming you had it as a kid.
It's interesting. I have a tangled history with Majora's Mask, which I think has at least something to do with why I do hold it in such high regard, because when I was a kid, I hated this game.
Interesting. Okay.
Hated it. So like everybody else, when Ocarina of Time came out, I loved it. I played it with my friend Justin, who was my best friend growing up. And, we played 99% of our games together. And when Ocarina of Time came out, it was the biggest thing on the planet, and like that to us, that was the peak. That was our favorite game. Nothing gets better than this. Ocarina of Time is like the height. This is the best game that's ever released. This is the best game that ever will release. It was mecca for us. And so when Majora's Mask came out, it was like, because a lot of people sort of forget how, not only how quickly Majora's Mask released after Ocarina of Time, but how it really was positioned as a sequel. How it was kind of positioned as a follow-up to Ocarina of Time. And in fact, it is a follow-up to Ocarina of Time. Very importantly, a follow-up to Ocarina of Time. So when I got into that game, and you begin to realize really, really quickly that this is so unlike Ocarina of Time, like dramatically unlike Ocarina of Time, not even just tonally, but in terms of gameplay and everything else. Like, I was like, oh, I don't like this. Like, this is, how am I supposed to beat this entire game in 3 days and everything, which is like probably the number one, I would say, the sort of time structure format of Majora's Mask, I think, is the number one thing that turns people off about the game. I know a lot of people who are like, I love the tone, I love what the game's trying to say, but I just can't, I can't get behind the 3-day time system. And that was definitely us when we were kids. And so I carried that opinion for years and years and years. And I would occasionally go back and try to fool around with it. But I don't know about you, Bill, but I'm very stubborn. And when I feel a certain way, at least until I hit like kind of adulthood, I was definitely like, this is the way I feel. And I don't budge, and, like, cool, I'll go back in and try Majora's Mask, but I'm coming in kind of with furrowed brows a little bit. Like, I sort of, I know how I feel about this. My mind's not going to get changed, and I would play it for like 15 minutes or something and be like, yeah, no, still hate this game. And it wasn't until the Majora's Mask 3D on the 3DS where I was like, you know what? No, like, it's time to put away that sort of childish thinking and give this a real shot for the first time ever. And it also came out at a really sort of important time in my life. My grandfather had just passed away, he was my hero. Like, he was, I absolutely adore him. If I could be a fraction of the person he was, like, the dude had no enemies. Like, he was just an amazing, amazing human being. And losing him put me in this like weird headspace of just like death and my relationship to death and like the way I thought about it. And so that game came out sort of just, I think maybe a year or two on 3DS after he passed away. And it just hit, when a game can just hit you at that right time and it can just speak to you exactly when you need it to speak to you. It blew my mind, and like it completely changed my perception on life and the way that I viewed my quality of life, the way that I think about death. And, a lot of people look at Majora's Mask as being like a game about doom and gloom and stuff, but I consider it an extraordinarily hopeful game. And I just remember rolling credits on it on 3DS and just like going outside. Like, I just needed some air.
Wow, yeah.
It just like rocked my world. Like, I just took a long walk for like an hour and a half on this walking trail that we had by our house at the time. And I just thought, like, that game just left me with so much to chew on. I've never done before or since, and I don't know if I never will. I ever will again. I've never done a 180 on a game like that ever in my life.
Interesting.
It just for me, and again, just that moment in my life, I needed something to kind of wake me up. Like I needed something to like slap me in the face and make me reevaluate the way I perceive death, because I'll share with you the way my grandfather died was he had a stroke while he was shaving, and in his stroke he fell over and hit his head on the sink, and he died from the concussion and the blood loss from hitting his head on the sink. And so the best person that I ever knew in my entire life died like that, you know? And to me, like that gave me this perspective of like, wow, like we really can't control it. And no matter how good we are, we could die by hitting our head on the sink. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that really was like a moment for me. And it gave me this like, and again, I'm not going to try to get too dark or get too deeply into, I don't want to like trigger anybody or whatever, but there was a moment after that where I was grappling with the darkness that was already in my head as somebody who has long struggled with, you know, depression and anxiety and stuff, of just like, well, like what if I could control that moment for myself? If you know what I'm saying, like, what if I don't leave that up to chance, you know? And so I needed something like Majora's Mask to say, hey, no, actually something as silly as making sure this guy sees his chickens grow up. Like that's the beauty of life. Something as small and silly as that is worth spending your cycle doing. Regardless of how your cycle ends, everything that happens in your cycle is worth doing. All of those people are worth saving. All of those problems are worth solving. And I just think it's such a beautiful, like hopeful message. And it was something that I just really, really needed to hear at that time of my life.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing that first off. That's I can't, you know, those are one of those things I just can't comment on, you know, that's just, I'm sorry you had to go through that. And I am glad that I'll just be broad and say art like this exists to help people through those things. And I think it's also when it comes to this, and this is me just thinking it through, not putting myself in your position, obviously, but kind of just thinking it through some experiences in my life as well, is you said that it's worth doing what you can in your cycle, right? Mm-hmm. All those things are worth it. And it's also important to understand and accept, like you said as well, with the bomb lady or with that the guy with the chickens, you may not be able to save everybody and do all those things. But that doesn't mean that the experience you had and that cycle, you know, I'll keep going to that word, that cycle wasn't meaningful.
Exactly.
So I don't know if I've quite gotten to that point where you had that experience with your remembering your grandfather and having that still kind of fresh on your mind and fresh on your heart, for lack of a better term. But I can definitely see that this overarching theme right now, at least, does feel very, I don't want to say dour, because it really isn't. It honestly feels rather honest. It feels like what people would do with this giant moon of impending doom staring at them, with everybody reacting differently. And I think, even though I'm still early on, and I don't think I've gotten to those themes where that would make sense to me, like, oh, I can totally see where you would connect like that. I can absolutely see this being a game where people are just reacting to a strange and terrifying situation. Again, everybody doing something different.
Yeah, I think it is. It's so, the game does so many interesting things thematically from a storytelling perspective. And it's interesting because I think that there's not actually all that much to spoil about the game. I think that the best things about Majora's Mask are actually just going to be the way it passes through you as a person. Like, I could tell you moment X or moment Y, but really what's going to matter is the way it hits you. you know, and the things that you take out of that. So I can only speak to my personal experience, and but for me, it's like the several different things like really strike me about the game. The first one is how depowering it is right away. Like, the game is a sequel to Ocarina of Time, and it opens with Link, who is the hero of time, has Navi, has Epona, has his ocarina and everything, and within the first couple of minutes loses all of that.
It's
right?
Crazy. Yeah. Yep.
Immediately loses all of that. Has to go and he's chasing down Skull Kid, and it's just like this little punk in the woods that takes it away from him. And then from there, he becomes this Deku scrub, right? He's like stuck in this Deku scrub form until he can get his ocarina back, and it becomes a mask and everything. And I think it's so interesting that the game makes you play out that first section through the perspective of a Deku scrub, and you deal with not only being talked down to as if you're a kid, like they don't know you're the hero of time, and nobody even seems to care.
Nope.
Because this isn't even like Hyrule. We're not even in Kansas anymore. This is Termina or whatever. And it has this otherworldly feeling already because the game was made on such a short development cycle. They reused character models and assets and things. And I think that's like something that makes the game so brilliant. You have this sense of like familiarity, and the game kind of plays with that. Like the twin witches that you fight in like Ocarina are in Majora's Mask, and you see them and you're like, well, hang on, but they're actually like kind of friendly in Majora's Mask. It's like totally weird, you know? So you already have that kind of like layer of fog over the entire thing, but you're walking around Clocktown and you can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. You walk in this building and they're like, get out of here. Like, frankly, like racist to you.
Yeah. It's a little, like, I was like xenophobic almost, but it's kind of
big time.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yes. I agree with that. It's
like,
yeah,
totally depowering. And like, you go from being the hero of time to being, you know, less than nothing as a Deku scrub. And then the game forces you to play out that first cycle that way. And just kind of see the scope of everything before you're ever able to do anything about it.
Right.
You know, and I think that's so brilliant in hindsight. Like, that totally didn't register with me when I first played the game as a kid. I'm like, well, this sucks. Like, I'm not playing as Link, and you know.
Yeah.
But now I look at it and I'm like, what a brilliant way to introduce you to this world, to this concept, and utilizing, you know, it's interesting because the main gameplay gimmick of the game is the masks, obviously, but really the ocarina is just as big a factor in Majora's Mask as any of the masks are.
For sure.
So it's this really interesting dichotomy, this really interesting breakdown of like how you do a sequel. And it's this kind of like interesting lens to hold up to Zelda just like as a franchise. And I always tell people, like, you can play something like Ocarina of Time and you're kind of safe in the knowledge that the rest of the franchise, for the most part, is going to follow this basic blueprint. Really, until Breath of the Wild, you know, basically every other 3D Zelda game can be traced back to Ocarina of Time, and really 3D RPGs in general.
No, I agree. I agree with that. And just to quickly comment on some of the points you made, I totally agree. I think actually it mirrors Ocarina pretty closely, because in Ocarina, you start as a little kid. You know, and you don't even have, if I remember right, again, it's very similar where you can't leave unless you have a sword, right? You can't leave the village. You can't leave Clocktown, so you're basically not Deku Scrub Link, and you have your sword and your shield, and you have the equipment, and they look at you and say, oh, you're an adult. Oops, sorry, come on in. Right. And I think that disempowerment is almost like a way more elegant way of Samus losing her weaponry for every single game. Instead of her, oops, it's all gone, or in some of the games, an AI telling her not to use them, which is also kind of weird. This is an emotional too, and you can connect with that, right? I think we can all connect to being at some point in our lives younger and ill-equipped to handle the world we're in and
Right.
stuck, right? Like just kind of stuck in that.
Stuck and not feeling like you have any sort of control, like over the situation. So it's interesting that the villain of the game is sort of in the exact same boat. The villain of the game is a commentary on that as well. And I don't want to like overtly spoil anything for you,
Sure.
or for anybody listening, but like, when you kind of learn the backstory or the motivations or whatever behind Skull Kid, it's actually very simple. And it's just this kid who's just lonely, and this kid who has completely lost control over his station in life and feels abandoned, and it's like such a simple thing, but like it doesn't become this like grand, he's not this like overarching force that's like this constant looming doom. The moon is that, right? The moon
right.
is the like unstoppable force and everything, but Skull Kid himself is just a lonely kid trying to stir the pot a little bit, trying to get attention, and I find that so fascinating, because I think that for the way that Zelda has sort of passed through me and my life is it does kind of make me think of like commentary on being a kid and instilling that sense of adventure or whatever. And Majora's Mask for me is the game where, okay, now this kid needs to learn to grow up, and now this kid needs to learn kind of what the value of life is and why life is precious and what is worth saving. And the fact that you can't do everything, that's such an important lesson that Majora's Mask teaches us. You can't save everyone. There's no such thing as a perfect loop, as a perfect cycle. Like you can't do everything there is to do. Like you can do a lot, but like you kind of have to make that decision. What is important in this time that I have? Is it something like, can I make something like huge and world ending out of just getting these two people? Probably the most famous side mission in the game is Anju and Cafe. And it's like, do I make this entire loop about them? Just them, which you essentially have to do. You essentially have to make an entire 3-day cycle out of just making sure these two people get married, And it just creates this like world-ending importance on little tiny human expressions of love. It is beautiful.
That is beautiful. And I think it also, with that 3-day loop, even though I think for me, when I first played it on the surface, it was this inconvenience. In this playthrough, now I'm aided with a guide. I kind of know what I need to do. I don't have as much friction as I would have had, 20 years ago. But I think I am appreciating the idea of small moments, right? Because I think in all of our lives, just full stop, our everyday lives, they're made up of small moments that have serious impact. And when I was writing fiction, I used to write short stories and sometimes microfiction, and I like that because I feel like you can get a lot of emotional weight in a very small window of time. Like you can just zoom in on something that matters. And if you can just zoom in on something that matters and that's impactful, you can create a fiction that has just as much, I think, emotional weight as, maybe even a short story or even like a novel. I think at least, Hemingway's famous 6-word stories,
Completely agree. Yeah.
Yes. So I feel like this game really has that element. The one thing in my early playthrough that stuck out for me, and I think I might have mentioned it on somebody's Discord, was the moment when you go to the chicken farm. I think it's like a chicken ranch, and you talk to the owner, and he's lamenting that he will never get a chance to see his chicks grow up to be roosters.
Yeah.
And that is just such a human and real thing. Right? Like that's a real emotion that I think, and his reaction is just this resignment. Like he's not sobbing. He's just resigned and melancholy over the fact that his little chicks are not going to roost and become cuckoos, or however you say it. And that was one of those moments where I was like, oh man, I think that's what this game is trying to do.
Yep.
And if so, I am extremely here for it because I love those little short stories. Like even saving the bomb bag lady from the guy who's there to steal her stuff. I remember the first time I was through it, the first cycle, I hear a help, you know, I look around, I see a guy run off, and that's it. Like, oh, he's gone.
And it's so brilliant because you get to know that so well, and you know kind of, you know, the solution to that problem, but you're going to have cycles where you've got this mission in your mind and this is what I have to do, and you're going to hear that help and realize I can't do it. I can't stop. I have to go and do this thing instead. You know? And like that's the thing. That's what is so like subtly brilliant about this 3-day cycle is that the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. The more you start crossing off these side missions and the more you help the guy with his chickens and stuff on future cycles, you're like, oh, wait, like that actually is just happening. He's not, during this loop, he's not getting to see his chicks grow up, you know? And like, that is all so powerful. And I think such a huge part of the brilliance and beauty of this game. The game is full. Like you were talking about how you love short stories and small human moments. Like that's what Majora's Mask is. Like it is extraordinarily human and raw. And like, especially when you get to the final day and like the way that like the music all speeds up and people are running around frantically and you've got like the mayor of Clocktown just trying to keep everybody calm, and you can just like you can just like feel the tension and the horror in the air. And
I think the ground rumbles sometimes.
Yeah, it rumbles. Man. And like when you get to those like final minutes, like the way the camera is like zooming in closer and closer and closer with every like tick of the clock, it's just breathtaking. Like just the way they managed to do that is incredible. And like, yeah, it's small, tiny moments. Like if you go to the postman that's like running around, he actually in the final day delivers a letter to himself. And like if you go into his room and find the letter that he delivers to himself, it just says, hey, like leave town, like stop working. Like please, I'm begging you, stop. And he can't even listen to himself. You know, he's just so focused on his route, and he just like keeps delivering the mail. And he tried to tell himself in that moment to leave Clocktown and get out, you know? Oh, it's so good. This is the game where, you know, we all wish we had the ability to do what you can do in this game. Turn back time, go through multiple cycles, see how it would all go. But this game kind of shows you, even if you have that power, it doesn't devalue the things that happen in a given cycle. Like that isn't a devalued thing. Every cycle is meaningful in its own way. So it's one of the, it just really makes everything feel precious. And I love that we do it through the lens of a hero who saved the world. And now it's not about being the hero of time who saved the world. It's about being the guy who reunites this daughter with her dad. It's about being this guy who makes sure these two get married. It doesn't matter that you're the hero of time. You know, it's even like the big like story beats that are not side missions. You know, every character that you get sort of a story path mask from is a character who either died or will die or dies in front of you. I think about, I don't know if you've gotten to this point in the game yet where you meet the Zora Mikau and you get the Zora mask.
Not yet, no.
I won't overtly spoil anything, but it's like a heartbreaking scene, and you get to see Link for the first and maybe one of the only times in the history of the franchise, even still to this day, feel actual like sorrow and like remorse. And like it's a total breakdown of like he's not just some rad hero. It's not even like an Ocarina of Time where eventually you become an adult or whatever. Like he's young Link like this whole time, and he puts on these masks and everything to help people. but that's really all it is. Something that I said, I think on this show, maybe the first time I was on here, was the impact that even a moment like the Astral Observatory had on me, which is something that happens quite early in the game. But like when you have to like look at the moon and see the stars beyond it and see the way the moon is sort of like falling in real time and everything, like just even a small moment like that can be insanely powerful. And that song, Astral Observatory, I think is like, it's one of my favorite pieces of music just ever, because like there's something about it that feels sad and it's like in this minor key and everything, but it's also somehow whimsical and like hopeful. Like it does both. And to me, it's like just the perfect encapsulation in that song of just what Majora's Mask is. It's actually okay. You can actually be both. You can be sad and you can be upset about things ending. The moon is going to come down for all of us one day. We can't avoid it. One day that's going to happen for every single one of us. But like the stuff that we do in our cycle is like worth doing. Even when we're staring down the face of it. There are stars beyond the moon, you know? And yeah, man. I took a lot from that game. It changed my life. Like, it totally changed my life.
Meet Justin of Killer Quail Studios. He is a content creator. He does YouTube. He has a Twitch stream. All of his channels and information are in the show notes, so be sure to check him out if you are so inclined. If Seth was one of my first interviews, Justin was definitely my last. And I'm not quite done with this game yet. There's other plans for this down the line, even after the next episode. But Justin reached out to me on Twitter pretty last minute, late in my process for making this episode. And I said, hey, if you want to be on, do you want to chat with me at 10 o'clock Central? And sure enough, he said, fine, sounds good to me. And we had a really great conversation about Majora and some other things as well. And while his story may be similar to Seth's in tone and even on occasion subject matter, it takes a different turn when I least expected it.
I don't know. I think it's funny because like it is kind of like my comfort game, even though it's so dark and depressing.
So a dark and depressing, scary game, and this is not a knock. I'm just curious. I want to kind of dive into this a little bit. A dark, scary, depressing game is your comfort game. That's kind of like your warm blanket. How many times have you gone through Majora?
I'd at least say probably like I'd say 7 times, like including the 3DS version.
Wow, that's impressive. That's impressive. So that definitely feels like comfort game.
Mm-hmm.
What about it does that for you?
Oh well, this is gonna be a little hard because like I'm gonna get pretty personal here. Like, I've seen a lot of death in my life. Like, I lost my parents, I lost my brother, I've lost my grandparents and all these things. And just like, I don't know, to me, darkness is just this kind of, it's comforting because it's like in a controlled environment. I don't know. It's like, it's kind of hard to explain.
I think I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, it's fine.
Sorry to hear that. But I think I can, not to put words in your mouth, but a controlled environment for dealing with grief, I think can be very helpful. I would think I can see that, you know. Again, this is coming from somebody who's only recently now playing it really genuinely for the first time. I could see that being a place where you could deal with it in this controlled environment. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, and like some of those characters, like I've been there, like in terms of grief and depression, and like sometimes like it's kind of like I've been whatchamacallit, like the lovers in Clocktown, like those mini games, like they're just I've been blissfully ignorant to my to impending doom of certain things in my life. So just kind of like I seeing multiple characters in that specific way, like it's like, oh, I've been there. I've reacted like that before. So I guess that's where it's also just that comfort is, because it's like you can see it and you can kind of understand it and kind of see like it's okay, you know.
You kind of almost empathize with it, right?
Yeah.
I think, you know, and again, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like The Lovers in Clocktown is a great example, because again, that's kind of a tragedy in that, you know, and there's lots of these, you know, the game is nothing but these short stories of people dealing with a terrible thing that's about to happen. They could see the moon descending, like there's, and you can't stop a moon. So,
oh yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And like,
yeah,
all the everybody acts differently, and I think that's what's I find so fascinating about it. Like, some people are just flat out scared. Some people will just flee, like they flee the clock, or flee the or the clock town and everything. Some people have just accepted it, you know, and are just cool with it. So it's just really fascinating just seeing multiple people's approaches, or just their outlooks to everything.
There's a good example also there. So you know, you have people who are just avoiding it, or just pretending it's not going to happen, just going about their everyday, kind of forcing themselves to be unaware. And I think all of those different reactions to a terrible thing, it's very human. For me, it feels very human. And again, from the perspective of somebody who's still new in the game, I could tell right away that this is something that has a series of these really cool short stories that are very meaningful. Yeah,
totally.
Were there any of those short stories that particularly struck you? You mentioned the Lovers in Clocktown. Did you find any of the stories that brought you kind of comfort, you know, when you think back on those?
I think like there's a few. Like I think one of like my it's, well, I said, you're in the Icona Canyon. There's that place is nuts, because like it's just like The Walking Dead. Literally just the little the mummies, the little Gibdos and Redeads, and just death all over. And like there's this poor little girl in like it's just this tiny little house, and poor little girl, she's just stuck in there. She's alone and scared, and like there's a part where you go in the underneath, like in the basement kind of area and stuff, and like you open the door, and it's like this creepy dude, like he's almost half mummy essentially. And the whole Song of Healing, like it does a lot of great, like you get a little mask out of it. You pretty much find out that's her father. And it's just like sad, because like sometimes like I think like that one kind of holds a lot to me, because like I don't know, like I said, like well, it's been 15 years since my parents passed. Like I lost them in my 20s, like early 20s. So it's like not having, like, just being by yourself, and it's terrifying. Sometimes it would feel like that, you know, just feel like just dread and doom walking outside.
Yeah, no, I could totally see that. And again, I'm sorry to hear that.
You're fine.
Yeah, no,
I always feel bad about bringing stuff like that up. So
no, this is kind of why the show exists to a certain extent. Not to dredge up old stuff, but to really show that a game, you know, N64 game made in the year 2000 or released in the year 2000 was able to mirror something you were experiencing, and mirror and hopefully help. It sounds, again, you said comfort food. Clearly, seeing this little girl in a tiny house with their half mummy father, that was impactful, and evidently, hopefully, helped you maybe see yourself in that and find a little bit of empathy in a world and at an age where that's hard to come by. You know, your 20s, it's hard to find someone to like empathize with you, you know?
Oh yeah, like
I could see that.
Well, no, just like, because like, yeah, like it was like a lot of empathy, and just kind of like, oh man, just that one, like and that's kind of the fun thing. As I said, like I've played it. I've played 7 times. I've played them at different points of my life, and it just kind of like it. I don't know. That's what I like doing with old games. I love playing them. It's fun to re-experience something at a different point of your life, a different point, different perspective. But yeah, that hit me. That hit me a lot the second time.
Oh man, when was the most recent playthrough of Majora?
It's been a while, probably like 5 years. I'm probably gonna replay it this year. Like I kind of in a better headspace in life, so I just kind of like, I don't know. I kind of want to just want to re-experience, and like, I don't know. I know that Majora's Mask is really. I've been talking about how it's like really depressing, but like one thing I really like about it is like all the little sub stories you do, like everything you follow, and like when you finish them, like it's kind of like a hopeful message, you know, like like whatchamacalls it, like when you get like the Goron mask with the Darmani guy, like it's like it's so sad to see his, like, because always when you play the Song of Healing, you get the whole like you get to see their life flash before their eyes, and you get to see their like their unfinished business, and like like it's a beautiful thing. Like once you beat the dungeon, because like he's just worried about his Goro, his people, you know, like he doesn't want them to starve in the winter. So it's like putting hope into it. Like you kind of take on that weight, you take on that responsibility, and it feels good once it's done, you know.
That's an interesting perspective, and the Song of Healing is kind of sad.
Oh, it is. Like,
man, could the Song of Healing be a little more? That'd be a funeral dirge. Like, boy, oh boy. But again, there's themes in there too. I mean, that's again piece of it, right? What are you sacrificing for this? You know, it's
I kind of see the Song of Healing as just kind of it's a means of comfort and kind of putting people at rest, and it's kind of hard. It's hard to put someone at rest, you know, like it.
Yeah.
It's,
yeah, it is, right? It is, you know, because again, we can dive into more of that. But what is really healing? Is it fixing? Is it putting something to rest? Like what is it? So, and healing is rarely easy, you know? So it's a very mature theme for an N64 game released in the year 2000. You know what I mean? And I'm really glad that you were able to find a lot of, not to be cheesy, but it sounds like some healing at least, or at least some comfort, which I think is a good way of putting it.
Oh yeah. Like it's kind of like, it is like that game. Like when I'm feeling down, it's kind of like, I like to replay it again just as a means of like, almost kind of like reinstilling hope. Cause like,
sure.
I don't know, Majora's Mask, I feel like it's just about helping people, and like through helping people, it kind of helps yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I'm loving about it so far, and again, still relatively early, is it's a series of these really cool short stories, and I love a good short story.
Oh yeah.
And I just, as an anthology of short stories and doing little things that impact a lot of little things that have big impact on a small scale. That is so cool to me because it's very real. It's what we do every day in life. We every day we make choices to hopefully make someone's day better or make something better on a very small scale. You know, none of us are going to be the hero of time, right? None of us are going to be an ocarina, you know, taking down Ganon and saving it. We don't do that, but we can do little things every day. I think it's mirrored very, very well in Majora.
And yeah, like I like it because, like, well, like you said, like we may not be a hero of time, but you can be a hero to somebody. Like, there's your loved ones that look up to you, and really, like, your good deeds and your good acts have pay off. You know, it may not be like terribly big, but it's like, I don't know, having your loved ones, you know, love you is always a great thing.
Yeah, no, and that's yeah, it sounds simple, but it's also has a lot of weight to it, right? And That's pretty cool, man. Thanks for sharing all that. I really appreciate it. It's amazing. Again, a video game can do that. You know, people talk about movies and music. Oh, I heard this song when I was 18 and I was going through this, or oh, I saw this movie, read this book, but nobody talks about games doing that. And that's kind of what, you know, I think what I try to do on this show is bring that to light and say, hey, no, games can do that as well, as a medium. So you mentioned that you play this on a regular basis, kind of like an every few years kind of situation, and you're due for a replay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think back to 5 years ago and think, how does Majora hit you as 5 years ago, Justin, versus, you know, I guess 20-year-old, I guess whenever you first played it, Justin? Like, does it hit? I'm sure it hits you differently. And you said that, you know, obviously any media does that. You said that. In what way do you think it hits you differently as an adult versus when you first played it?
Well, I think a lot of it just like, first playing it, it's just, I said, it's just dark for the not understanding the dark tones to everything, and just kind of like, okay, this is cool. But like, I think just, I said, after play, I said, being an adult, and I said, having an experience through a lot of grief and a lot of sadness and a lot of just trauma and everything like that, it just, you kind of understand. I said, it's just, again, it's the whole empathy. It is, I know I'm like kind of repeating myself, but like,
That's fine.
It is just like, it's a different game, you know, like it's just, you can see it just through a different lens. And just like, when you're a kid, I said, you have that, you just don't get it quite, you know, but like, as an adult, you kind of like, ooh, I have family members like this. I have
Sure. Yeah.
just how people act, and just like, it hits a lot. It just hits a lot harder for myself. And I kind of like, I said, I like that. It's a strange comfort, but it's just, yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't even say strange comfort, because again, seeing situations in your life reflected back at you in a way that feels real is really powerful, and actually kind of rare in media, right? Like, media is designed to sensationalize and heighten. But when you see something that you can look at and say, oh, I get what that character's going through because I've gone through something similar. And wow, designers of Majora's Mask, y'all nailed it. It's just a surreal world. I love the idea of, this is an idea that I discussed with another guest earlier, I think last week it was, when we talked about this. And this is kind of his thought, and I don't want to, you know, crib his thought too much.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just shout out Seth for this thought. Was the game is really adept and makes you feel that, it makes you realize there's only so much you can do. Because, for example, one of my favorite little short stories thus far is the guy on the chicken ranch who is sitting there bemoaning that his little chicks will never grow up to be full age chickens or cuckoos, or how we say it.
Yeah.
And your little mission there is to magically turn his chicks into full grown chickens. And he's so happy. And he's like, oh my gosh, this is great. Thank you. And then of course time resets and he's right back to where he was.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea is so sad, but kind of to your point, it reminds us that let's do everything we can right now and do the best we can and realize we can't save everybody. I think there's so much power to that.
Oh yeah. And like, I guess I also see that too, is like, it's also because like you made someone happy, and like going back in time, everything's totally reset, even though you still have those memories. And it's like, you may not get another thanks, you may not get anything, but you made someone's life happy. And like, that's what I like about this game, is like, you're just kind of doing little things to make people happy in this 3-day countdown, you know, to people's impending doom.
The clock is always ticking, and there's always someone to save. That is Majora's Mask in a nutshell. Or is it? Is there more to this game that I am literally enthralled with at this point, to the point where there are 2 episodes for one game and probably will be a third once I actually complete it? Because yeah, I haven't finished it yet. As of this recording, I'm still only about a third of the way through, and I begged my guests, please don't spoil anything. I want to experience this as unblemished as possible. I want to just drink it all in, because I am all in on what is rapidly rising the ranks of my favorite Zelda games. And yes, I am going to finish it, because towards the end of my conversation with Helena, just as I was about to segue into Majora's Mask, she issued me the following challenge. I've heard that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why. To be fair, now just a quick aside on this, I am not an expert on Majora. I've played it a bit. I've been around it, and I know enough about it where I can be conversant, but I've never completed it. That is one of those games I am going to finish before the series is up. I'm working on Wind Waker now, and then I'll do Majora. Those are my 2 giant holes. So I'd love to hear why you kind of what that 5 stages of grief, like how does that articulate for you?
I hate to keep you on your toes, but I think that you should finish on Majora, and I think that we should circle back to this, because I think it'll resonate a lot more then. That
will make sense. You know what? You're on. You're on.
Perfect. I love that.
There we go. You're on. I love that. I like when I can figure out shows like months in advance and take that time. Yeah, I think I'll take you up on that. I will.
That sounds great. I love that.